The alert came in at the worst possible time. Dominion Fleet Command was in the middle of a routine budget review when the sensor report landed on Admiral Draven's desk. He almost ignored it. Frontier anomalies happen twice a week: rogue asteroids, dead satellites, old wreckage drifting through unmapped corridors. His staff had a system for those. Flag, log, dismiss. But this one did not get dismissed. His junior officer, a young Thelian named Tura, brought the report personally instead of sending it through the network. That alone told Draven something was wrong. "Outer Rim, Sector 9, Tura said, placing the data slate on the desk. "The signature appeared 6 hours ago. It is not moving. It is not broadcasting any registered identification code, but it is broadcasting something." Draven picked up the slate. The energy reading on the screen was clean and strong, not chaotic like wreckage, not pulsing like a distress beacon. It was a steady, controlled output, the kind that only came from an active and functioning vessel. "What class?" he asked. Tura was quiet for a moment. "That is the problem, Admiral. It does not match any class in our records." Draven looked up. "Not pirate configurations?" he asked. "No. Rogue colony drives, black market builds. We checked all of them, nothing matches." Draven set the slate down and leaned back. The Outer Rim was technically open space. No Dominion member species had claimed that sector, mostly because there was nothing there worth claiming. A few dead systems, some old survey markers, and apparently now an unregistered vessel sitting very still and doing nothing. He dispatched a scout formation the same afternoon. 3 light cruisers under Captain Rel, experienced, careful, not the type to do something foolish. He told them to approach slow, scan thoroughly, and report back before making contact. Rel acknowledged the orders. His formation moved out. The first report came back 8 hours later. Rel confirmed the vessel was real. He sent back preliminary scan data. The ship was large, larger than his 3 cruisers combined. Its hull configuration was unlike anything in the Dominion's database. The drive signature was clean and efficient. No weapons were visible, but the hull had structural reinforcement patterns that suggested the design had been built with defense in mind from the start. Then Rel sent a second message, shorter than the first. It said, "They are hailing us. Shall we respond?" Draven stared at that line for a long moment. Then he sent back a single word, "Yes." What followed was a silence of nearly 4 hours. Draven sat at his desk and waited. His staff moved around him quietly. Nobody said much. Then Rel's channel opened again, and this time there was something different in his voice. Not fear exactly. Something closer to the feeling of standing at the edge of something very large and only just beginning to understand its size. "Admiral," Rel said, "they speak Galactic Standard, fluent." The officer who responded identified herself as Commander Nadia Oren of the INS Resolute, representing the Unified Space Command of Earth. She was polite. She asked if we required assistance. Draven said nothing. "She asked if we required assistance," Rel repeated, as if he was still processing it himself. "As if we were the ones who might be lost." Draven asked for a visual. Rel sent one. The image that came through showed the ship in full. It was not a warship in the aggressive sense. It did not bristle with obvious weapon arrays or carry the sharp, angular design that most military vessels use to signal threat. It was something else. Smooth in places, reinforced in others, long and deliberate in its proportions. It looked like something that had been designed by people who had thought very hard for a very long time about exactly what they needed and had then built precisely that. Draven sat with the image in front of him for a while. He had read the Dominion's files on Earth once, years ago, when he was still a junior officer going through routine briefings on developing worlds. He remembered almost nothing specific, only a general impression of a small, chaotic planet full of short-lived creatures who argued a lot, and had not yet figured out how to leave their own solar system without difficulty. That file was apparently out of date. He called his intelligence division. He asked for everything they had on humanity, every file, every survey, every old contact report, every flagged transmission. He wanted it all on his desk by morning. Then he sent a message back to Rel. Maintain position. Do not provoke. Keep the channel open and remain courteous. Rel acknowledged. Draven looked at the image one more time before closing it. The ship in the frame sat perfectly still against the black. No aggression. No posturing. It was simply there, steady and enormous, as if it had been there for a long time and was prepared to remain for much longer. He thought about the phrase Rel had repeated. She asked if we required assistance. Draven had been in the fleet for 30 years. He had dealt with pirates, with rogue states, with desperate colonies and angry border disputes. In all of that time, no unknown vessel had ever opened contact with one of his scout formations by asking if they needed help. He did not sleep well that night. By morning, the intelligence files were on his desk. He opened the first one, read the date on the original survey, and felt something settle cold and quiet in his chest. The file was 63 years old. Nobody had updated it since. The oldest file in the stack was a survey report from 63 years ago. The newest one was 41 years old. Everything in between was either duplicated data or internal Dominion memos referencing the same original surveys without adding anything new. Admiral Draven read through all of it. It took most of the morning. The picture the files painted was of a species that had barely scratched the surface of space travel at the time of last contact. Their ships had been small, slow, and fragile by Dominion standards. Their communication technology had been primitive. Their political structure had been a mess of competing nations that could not agree on a unified position on anything, let alone on how to engage with interstellar neighbors. The Dominion's assessment at the time had been simple: low priority, monitor occasionally, no intervention needed. They would either develop into something worth talking to eventually, or they would not. Nobody had followed up. Draven called his intelligence chief, a senior analyst named Pell, into the office and laid the files out in front of him. Pell looked at the dates. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "We should have updated these." "Yes," Draven said, "we should have." Pell straightened up and tried to recover his professional composure. "Even so," he said, "one large vessel does not change the strategic picture significantly. A single impressive ship could be a prototype, a demonstration piece, something built to make a statement without representing actual fleet capacity." Draven thought about the image of the Resolute, the way it sat there, the way Commander Oren had asked if his scouts needed assistance. "Maybe," he said. Pell left to begin drafting a new assessment. Draven was not particularly confident in whatever it would say. On the other side of the buffer zone, Nadia Oren received her orders from Earth's Unified Space Command 3 hours after the scout formation made contact. The message was brief and calm, which was exactly how High Command communicated when they wanted you to understand that the situation was serious, but that they were not going to panic about it. The orders said, a Dominion diplomatic delegation would be requesting a formal meeting within the next 72 hours. She was to receive them aboard the Resolute. She was to be courteous and professional. She was to answer questions honestly where she could and deflect where she could not. She was not to volunteer information about fleet numbers, production capacity, or operational range. There was one more line at the bottom, added in the personal note style that High Command used when they wanted something understood but not written into the official record. It said, "Let them see enough to take us seriously." Nadia read that line twice. Then she set the orders aside and went to brief her crew. The delegation arrived on schedule. 4 ships, mid-sized, carrying a mix of Dominion military officers and civilian officials. They docked at the Resolute's secondary bay without any difficulty. The bay was large enough to fit all four of their vessels with room to spare, which Nadia suspected made an impression before anyone had said a single word. She met them at the airlock herself, just her in a clean uniform with two crew members standing quietly behind her. No honor guard. No ceremony. Just a woman standing at the entrance to her ship, relaxed and ready. The lead official was a Dominion officer named Counselor Vaz's advance representative, a careful, well-dressed figure named Sen, who had the practiced calm of someone who spent his life walking into rooms where he was supposed to be the most important person present. He looked at Nadia. He looked past her at the corridor behind her. His calm slipped for just a fraction of a second. The Resolute's interior did that to people who were not prepared for it. Nadia welcomed them aboard and offered to show them to the meeting room. Sen said they would appreciate a brief tour first, if that was acceptable. Nadia said of course and led the way. She walked them through 3 sections of the ship, not the most impressive ones, not the drive core or the primary operational deck, just 3 ordinary sections: crew quarters, a secondary engineering bay, a logistics corridor. Ordinary, functional, clean. By the time they reached the meeting room, 2 members of the delegation had stopped talking entirely and were simply looking at things. Sen sat down across from Nadia and folded his hands on the table. He was doing his best to project the confidence of someone who had not just walked through a ship that quietly dismantled every assumption he had brought with him. "Commander Oren," he said, "the Dominion is pleased to open a formal dialogue with Earth." "Thank you," Nadia said. "We're glad you reached out." Sen asked a number of careful questions about Earth's current territorial claims, about the Resolute's mission parameters, about humanity's interest in Dominion trade networks. Nadia answered carefully. She was honest where she could be. She deflected where she could not. She was never rude, never evasive in a way that felt hostile, just a professional person having a professional conversation, comfortable in her own space. At the end of the session, Sen asked, almost as an aside, how many ships like the Resolute Earth currently had in operation. Nadia smiled at him. It was a genuine smile, warm and entirely unhelpful. "I'm not able to share fleet numbers at this stage," she said. "I hope you understand." Sen said of course. He understood completely. On the shuttle back to the Dominion formation, he sent an encrypted message to Pell's office. It contained no analysis, no recommendations, just a single line. "Update the files. Everything you have, update all of it." Pell spent 2 days writing his updated assessment. He interviewed Sen 3 times. He pulled every sensor reading Captain Rel's formation had collected. He cross-referenced energy output data with known drive technologies from 38 species in the Dominion database, looking for overlap, looking for something that explained where humanity had gotten its engineering from. He found nothing. No overlap, no borrowed technology, no external source. The Resolute had been built from scratch by human hands, using human designs, developed entirely within human space, while the Dominion looked elsewhere. Pell delivered his assessment to Admiral Draven in person. He set the document on the desk, stood back and waited. Draven read the summary page. He turned to the next page, then the next. "How confident are you in this?" he asked. "More than I am comfortable with," Pell said. The assessment said 3 things clearly. First, the Resolute was not a prototype. The quality of its construction and the maturity of its systems indicated a design that had gone through multiple generations of development and testing. Prototypes had visible rough edges. This ship did not. Second, the energy efficiency of its drive system was significantly beyond what the Dominion had assumed humanity capable of. The humans had not just caught up in certain specific areas, they had moved ahead. Third, the manufacturing scale required to produce a vessel of that class, meant that Earth had been running serious industrial programs for decades without flagging in any external monitoring. Pell's conclusion was short. It said, "We do not know what else they have built. We do not know how much of it there is. We should find out before making any further assumptions." Draven set the document down. He thought for a moment. Then he asked Pell to arrange for a second delegation, this time with full technical staff, not just diplomatic figures. He wanted people who could ask real questions and understand real answers. The second delegation arrived at the Resolute 4 days later. Nadia met them the same way she had met the first group, at the airlock, unhurried, just herself. This group was different in character. They were quieter, more careful. They asked to see the engineering sections. Nadia said she would show them what she could. She walked them into the secondary drive corridor. She did not take them to the primary core, but she did not need to. The secondary corridor alone was enough. The Dominion's technical staff moved through it slowly, their instruments out, their eyes moving over every pipe and panel and junction. One of them, a Thelian engineer named Was, stopped next to a power relay array and stood very still for almost a full minute. Nadia waited. Was turned to her and said, very carefully, "This is a heat cycling buffer system, but the configuration is inverted from any design I have seen." Nadia nodded. "Our engineers found that running the cycle in the standard direction created a feedback problem at high output," she said. "Someone figured out that inverting the buffer sequence eliminated it entirely. It took about 7 years of testing to confirm." Was looked at the array again. 7 years. "Give or take," Nadia said. Was wrote something in his notes. He did not say anything else for the rest of the corridor. The technical delegation spent 6 hours aboard the Resolute. When they left, they were quieter than when they had arrived. The questions they had come with, the careful, slightly dismissive questions of experts who expected to find something impressive but explainable, had mostly gone unanswered in the way they had hoped. Instead of walking away with an explanation that fit their existing picture, they were walking away with a picture that no longer fit anything. That evening, on the Dominion Formation's lead ship, the technical staff gathered in the main briefing room. Was presented what they had observed. His colleagues added their own notes. The conversation that followed was not comfortable. The core problem was not that the Resolute was so far beyond anything the Dominion had. That would have been easier to process. In a way, a clear technological gap had clear implications. The problem was that the ship was not beyond them in a general sense. It was beyond them in very specific ways, in carefully selected areas, while being entirely comparable to Dominion standards in others. That kind of development did not happen by accident. It happened when engineers spent a long time thinking about exactly what problems they needed to solve, and then solved only those problems, without wasting time on anything else. It was efficient in a way that felt deliberate, focused in a way that implied priorities, and the priorities it implied were not those of a civilization that expected to be protected by someone else. Was put his notes down at the end of the briefing and said what everyone in the room had been thinking for the past hour. "They built this for themselves," he said, "not to impress us, not to trade with us. They did not build it to show anyone anything. They built it because they decided they needed it, and then they built it and did not tell anyone." Nobody argued with him. The message that went back to Dominion Command that night was flagged urgent, not because the Resolute was a threat. It had done nothing threatening. Commander Oren had been perfectly polite the entire time. The urgency was because of a different question entirely. If they built this and did not tell anyone, what else did they build? 3 weeks after the first contact, Dominion High Command did something it had not done in 11 years. It called an emergency full session. Every senior member species sent a representative. The chamber was full in a way that made the walls feel close. Draven sat at the military briefing table, and watched the room fill up and thought about how rare it was for so many species to agree that something needed immediate attention. The session opened with Pell's updated assessment. He presented it without embellishment, reading the key points in a flat, steady voice. The Resolute, the drive technology, the manufacturing capacity implied by the ship's construction quality, the 63-year gap in their intelligence on human development. When he finished, the chamber was quiet for a moment. Then it was not quiet at all. Several representatives spoke at the same time. The Volkai delegate demanded to know how a species under passive monitoring had managed to develop to this level without a single alert being raised. The Sethian representative asked whether there was any indication of hostile intent. Two others wanted immediate sanctions imposed on human space, travel restrictions, a technology embargo, until the situation was properly assessed. Draven waited for the noise to settle. Then he spoke. He said that he had reviewed every piece of contact data personally. Commander Oren had been professional throughout. Her crew had been disciplined and courteous. The Resolute had remained stationary and had not moved into claimed Dominion space at any point. Nothing about their behavior indicated aggression. What it indicated, Draven said carefully, was confidence. He let that word sit in the room for a second. Then he said that imposing sanctions or restrictions on a civilization whose actual capabilities they still did not fully understand, without cause, would not make the Dominion safer. It would make them look frightened. And more importantly, it would tell humanity exactly what the Dominion thought of them, which was that they were a problem to be managed, not a people to be spoken with honestly. Draven was not a diplomat. He said all of this in the plain language of someone who had spent his life thinking about strategic problems. The chamber heard it the same way. The sanctions motion did not pass. What passed instead was an authorization for a senior diplomatic mission, not a fact-finding visit, a real one with full authority to open formal talks. The person they sent was not a military figure. His name was Roland Mace, and he was Earth's designated senior negotiator, a quiet, older man who had spent 30 years in diplomatic work and had the particular kind of stillness that came from sitting in many difficult rooms and leaving most of them with something useful. He arrived on the Resolute with a small team and no ceremony. Nadia met him and immediately understood that this was a different kind of meeting from the ones before. Sen had been an advanced figure, probing and polite. The technical staff had been analysts. Roland was someone who had come to actually talk. They sat down in the main conference room. The Dominion sent their own senior representative, Counselor Vaz, who arrived an hour after Roland and sat across the table with the practiced composure of someone very good at not showing what he was thinking. Roland opened by saying that Earth appreciated the Dominion's willingness to engage directly. He said that humanity had no interest in conflict and had significant interest in a stable and productive relationship with its neighbors. Then he placed a document on the table and said that Earth had prepared a framework for discussion. Vaz picked up the document. He read the first page. His expression stayed careful and neutral, but something behind his eyes shifted. The document was not a request for membership. It was not a petition for recognition or a plea for trade access. It was a framework, Earth's framework, built on Earth's terms for what a relationship between humanity and the Dominion would look like if they chose to pursue one. It had provisions for mutual border respect, trade terms that were equal, not tiered. A clause that specified neither party would require the other to share military or technological intelligence as a condition of the agreement. And a section, quietly placed near the end, easy to miss if you were not paying attention, that stated Earth reserved the right to maintain independent defense capacity at whatever level its own security requirements demanded, without consultation or approval from any external body. Vaz set the document down. "This is," he said, choosing his words with great care. A comprehensive opening position. It is our position, Roland said, not an opening position, their position. Vaz asked several questions. Roland answered them directly. The conversation was calm and almost entirely without friction, which was somehow more unsettling to the Dominion side than an argument would have been. Arguments could be worn down. Calm positions held by people who had no particular need to be anywhere else were much harder to move. After 2 hours, Vaz requested a recess to consult with his team. In the corridor outside, his aide asked him quietly what he thought. Vaz said he thought the humans had spent a very long time preparing for this conversation. He thought they had anticipated most of the Dominion's standard negotiating positions and had built their document to address each one before it could be raised. And he thought Roland Mace was the kind of person who had all the time in the world, because he already had everything he needed and was simply waiting for the other side to catch up. His aide asked what they should do. Vaz thought about the Resolute sitting outside. He thought about the technical report. He thought about 63 years of unchecked development. "We talked to them honestly," he said. "I do not think there is another option that serves us well." The message came from the frontier at the worst possible moment, right in the middle of the recess. Draven was back at Dominion Command when it landed on his screen. He read it once, very fast, then read it again slowly. Then he set it down and looked at the wall for a while. 3 separate frontier monitoring posts had each reported contact with unknown vessels in the past 72 hours. Not the same vessel, 3 different ones. Different sizes, different configurations, same general design philosophy, clean lines, high efficiency, no visible aggression. All 3 had responded to hailing signals in Galactic Standard. All 3 had identified themselves as human ships on standard operations. All 3 had been perfectly polite. All 3 were in sectors that Dominion monitoring had considered uninhabited. Draven called his operations officer, a steady figure named Herrick, and asked him to pull the coordinates of all 3 contacts and map them together. Herrick did it in about 4 minutes. He sent the map without comment. Draven looked at the map. The 3 contact points were spread across a wide area of the outer rim. They were not clustered near Earth. They were not clustered near each other. They were distributed, positioned the way you positioned assets when you were thinking about coverage and reach, not proximity. He thought about what Pell's report had said about manufacturing capacity. He thought about the Resolute's construction quality. He thought about the inverted buffer system that had taken 7 years to test. He called Pell. Pell answered looking like he had not slept. Draven asked him a direct question. If the Resolute represented mature human engineering, and human engineering programs had been running for at least 6 decades, what was the minimum number of major vessels humanity might have produced in that time? Pell was quiet for a moment. Then he said he would rather not answer that question without more data. Draven said he wanted an answer anyway. Pell said very carefully that if production efficiency was comparable to the drive efficiency the technical team had observed, and if Earth had been running programs across multiple stations and facilities, which the distributed contact points suggested, the number was not small. It was possibly not even medium. Draven ended the call. He sat alone in his office for a while. Then he did something he had not done in a long time. He went to find Sova, his weapons chief, because Sova had been pushing for a harder response since the beginning, and Draven wanted to hear that argument out loud one more time to see if it still sounded reasonable. Sova made the argument. He said the Dominion had to establish dominance early, show humanity its limits, deploy a full battle group to the buffer zone as a signal, not to attack, just to make clear that the Dominion was not going to be pushed around by a species that had been considered a developing world 30 years ago. Draven listened to the whole thing. Then he asked Sova one question. He asked, If humanity responded to a show of force by showing theirs, were we certain we would be happy with the comparison? Sova did not have a fast answer to that. Draven told him to stand his forces down and went back to his desk. On the Resolute, Nadia received a data packet from High Command. It was flagged quiet, which in Earth's communication system meant read this, understand it, do not discuss it openly. The packet contained the same 3 frontier contact reports Draven had just seen, forwarded through Earth's own monitoring network. Nadia read the packet. She passed it to Roland with a brief note that said, "They will know by now." Roland read it during the recess, when the talks resumed and Vaz returned to the table. Roland watched him carefully. Vaz had a different quality to his composure now, still controlled, but with more effort behind it. Roland decided not to raise the frontier contacts directly. That was not how he worked. He simply continued talking about the framework document, section by section, in the same unhurried way. But after an hour, Vaz set down his notes and looked at Roland directly and asked a question that was not about the document at all. He asked, "How long has Earth been operating in the Outer Rim?" Roland said that Earth had been maintaining a presence in open space for some time. Vaz asked what some time meant. Roland said it meant long enough to feel comfortable there. Vaz looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, very slowly, in the way that people nod when they have just finished measuring something and have found that it is bigger than they expected. He picked up the framework document again. This time he did not look for arguments. He looked for things he could agree to. The session ran for 4 more hours. By the end of it, 6 of the 12 framework sections had been provisionally accepted by the Dominion side without significant changes. 3 others were in active discussion. The remaining 3, including the Independent Defense Clause, had not been challenged directly. When they broke for the evening, Vaz's aide asked him how he thought it was going. Vaz said he thought it was going the way it was always going to go. The aide asked what that meant. Vaz looked out the corridor window at the Resolute's hull, visible through the station glass. The ship was lit from within, steady and quiet, going about its business. "It means," Vaz said, "that we are figuring out how to deal with a civilization that already figured out how to deal with us." He said it without bitterness, just the plain recognition of a fact. It was, he thought, probably a better position than the alternative. The final session began without any of the careful ceremony that the earlier ones had carried. No opening statements, no formal positioning. Vaz sat down, put the framework document on the table with his handwritten notes in the margins, and looked at Roland and said he was ready to finish this. Roland said good, so was he. They worked through the remaining 3 sections methodically. The trade terms section came first. The Dominion had wanted a tiered structure, standard practice for new entrants, with Earth paying higher access fees for the first 20 years while it built up its trading profile. Roland declined that without drama and offered a flat, equal-rate structure instead. Vaz accepted it after a short discussion. The aide across the table looked mildly surprised. Vaz did not look surprised at all. The border recognition section came next. This one took longer. The Dominion standard language gave them oversight authority in disputed zones, a clause they used frequently to manage younger civilizations. Roland removed it entirely from the draft and replaced it with a joint notification system. No oversight, no authority on either side. Pure communication. Vaz sat with that for 20 minutes, consulting quietly with his team. Then he agreed to it. The Independent Defense Clause was last. Vaz looked at it for a while without speaking. It was the clause that said Earth kept its military capacity at whatever level it chose, without asking anyone, without reporting to anyone, without submitting to any external review. For the Dominion, which had built most of its political structure on the idea that it could monitor and influence the military development of nearby civilizations, this was not a comfortable thing to sign. Vaz asked Roland, in a quiet and entirely genuine way, whether Earth would ever be willing to share some of its technical developments, not as a condition of the agreement, just as a question. Roland said that was something the two sides could discuss in future sessions, through proper channels, on terms both sides agreed to. Vaz said that was a fair answer. He picked up the signing instrument and paused for just a moment. Then he asked the question that Nadia had been expecting since the very first day, the question that all of this had really been building toward, from the moment Captain Rel's scouts went quiet in Sector 9. He asked, "Why did you not come to us sooner?" Nadia answered before Roland could. She had been sitting quietly at the edge of the table throughout the final session, present but not leading. But this question was hers. She said, "We wanted to be ready." Vaz looked at her, ready for what? Nadia thought about it for a second, not because she did not know the answer but because she wanted to say it right. "Ready to sit at this table," she said, "without needing anything from you." The room was quiet for a moment. Vaz looked at her with the expression of someone who had just heard something true. Then he signed the document. Roland signed it next. Nadia witnessed it. Vaz's aide recorded it officially. The framework agreement between Earth's Unified Space Command and the Galactic Dominion was complete. There was no celebration in the room, no particular fanfare. Both sides gathered their materials, exchanged polite words, and began the practical work of figuring out what came next. There was a lot of it: trade routes to map, communication protocols to establish, a dozen smaller agreements that would need to follow the main framework over the coming months. Draven received the signed document at his desk in Dominion Command. He read through it. He noted the clauses. He noted especially the ones that were not in it, the oversight provisions, the monitoring rights, the new member compliance requirements that the Dominion had applied to every other species it had ever brought into its framework. None of them were there. He sent a message to Pell asking for the final version of the Human Intelligence Assessment to be officially updated and filed. He wanted it on record. He wanted the new picture, the accurate one, to replace the 63-year-old file permanently. Pell sent back a note saying it was already done. He had filed it that morning. At the top of every updated section, he had added a single line in bold. Previous assessment was based on outdated data. All prior conclusions are invalidated. Do not assume current status based on historical classification. Draven read that line and thought it was probably the most useful thing Pell had ever written. On the Resolute, after the delegation ships had undocked and moved away, Nadia stood in the observation corridor and looked out at the black. The talks were done. The document was signed. The next phase, slower, more complicated, full of small arguments and careful compromises, was just beginning. It would take years, probably decades. Building something real always did. A crew member walked past and asked if she was all right. She said she was fine, she was just thinking. She thought about the engineers who had built the Resolute, year after year, in quiet stations far from any audience. She thought about the planners who had decided, a long time ago, that humanity would not wait to be invited. It would simply build what it needed, learn what it needed, and then show up when it was ready. She thought about the Dominion's 63-year-old file, full of wrong assumptions and outdated data, sitting in a database somewhere marked obsolete. She thought about Roland's calm voice working through framework sections, one by one, without hurry. She thought about Vaz's face when he signed. Outside the window, the stars were the same stars they had always been, distant and indifferent, enormous beyond any measurement that meant anything to a human mind. Humanity had always looked at them anyway. That had never changed. It never would.